Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. In this video, I basically just want to continue where I left off last video, which was talking about nested loops, where in this video, I basically just want to use and write a program that introduces the idea of a nested loop. So notice right here, we are tasked to print the following. It's not stating the question, but that's what I intended to have. I just wanted to print out a star and then 2 stars, 3 stars, and 4 stars, and then 5 stars. This is one thing you have to understand. Whenever you see patterns changing based on different outputs, so for example, the first output is different from the second output, changes based on the third output, and then you see a pattern, just know that you will be dealing with some kind of nested loop. Let me just go ahead and copy this and go back to the whiteboard I have been working off of, and let me create a text. And let me go ahead and move this here. Move this here, move this here, move this here. And then, so let me go ahead and get my marker. Oops, let me undo that. So basically, what we know is we have the first line of output has, when the first line we know 1, we print out 1 star. Let me just go ahead and just draw a table. Let me just do star and then just say current. I'll just call it cur, because this is the current iteration that we are on. So the first iteration, the number of stars we have is 1. The second iteration, 2, we have 2 stars. The third iteration, we have 3 stars. The fourth iteration, we have 4 stars. So from this, what do we know? When we know that we will be printing and we will be running this loop 4 times and doing something 4 different times. Right away, I know that I will be having a loop inside a loop. Right away, I know that this is going to be my outer loop. So one way in which you could figure out what is your outer loop and what is your inner loop is the fact that the number of outputs that you see is the number of times that you will have to run this code. In this case, I know that I will have a loop that goes from 1, 2, 3, 4. So basically, I will run this loop. Sorry, I need to write 5 stars as well. 5. And let me just erase this line and then just go ahead and do this. I know that I will have to print out 5 outputs. And right away, I know that my loop will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know last time I talked about how you could do 5 times 5, which will give you 25 outputs. But notice that this loop is based on this loop right here. So meaning the inner loop will run based on the outer loop. So whatever number the outer loop is currently on will run based on that. So in this case, when I is 4, the inner loop will run 4 times. When I is 5, the inner loop will run 5 times. But in the last couple of videos, we talked about how that is not always the case, where the inner loop will run and start a different number of times. This is known as a controlled loop, meaning that the outer loop is controlled by the inner loop, which is always necessarily the case. But when I say it's a controlled loop, this is the term that I invented. This is how I like to remember it. This is the fact that the loop that you are running inside the outer loop is controlled by the outer loop. So the loop that you're running inside the inner loop, so in this case, this is the J loop, is controlled by the I loop. So meaning, whatever I is, you will have to go I times. So if I is 2, you will run it 2 times. When I is 3, you'll run it 3 times. When I is 4, you'll run it 4 times. When I is 5, you'll run it 5 times. So what I know is I'm going to have a loop that goes, let me go back to the code output again. So right away, I know I'm going to have a loop that goes for int I equals 1. I is less than or equal to 5, because I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to produce 5 outputs. And I'm going to do I++. And then I can just copy this. And let me just go do J. And let me just go do J. And let me just do J++. So if I try to print this out, system.out.println. If I try to print out... If I try to print this out, let's see what happens. So everything is on different lines. And I know right away that I'm going to have 25 lines of output, because this loop goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it will run that 5 times. So I'm going to have 25 lines of output. I don't have to count it, but I know it's going to be 25. Right away, what I know is so far that this is not what I want to print out. So I know last video I said you will run the loop. So to figure out how many times this loop runs, you'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you will do that 5 times, 5 different times. So that's going to be 25 lines of output. But if you want to produce this output right here, we know that when I is 1, what does J go? J starts from 1 and goes to what? Well, I obviously. When when I is 2, J goes from 1 to 2. So we know J goes from 1 to 1, and then we know J goes from 1 to 2, and then we know J goes from 1 to 3, and then here we know J goes from 1 to 4, and then here we know J goes from 1 to 5. What we know is we always have our initialization start at 1. So let me go back here. Our initialization starts at 1. And then what do? This is always changing. And what's keeping track of this number? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's I. So what we need to go up to and have our test go up to is I. There we go. So now this will solve part of the problem, but not necessarily everything. So let me just compile it and run it. As you can see, we've done a little bit better, not necessarily better, but we've done better. But now here's the interesting fact. This is what we are doing so far. Let me just go ahead and clear all of this real quick. Let me go ahead and clear this. It might take a while. If I just can make the pen, let me just make the eraser bigger so that way it can clear faster. I apologize, guys. Let me just clear it. I'll make it even bigger. There we go. So basically the idea was we had a loop I, so it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we know we had another loop J, and let's just look at the iteration, what's happening in the iteration. So the first iteration we go from 1 to 1. What do? We print out a star. And here what we're doing is we're doing a println, so we just print out a star. Here we just print out a star. And now when I is 2, we go 1, 2. So what are we doing? We're printing out a star and another star. When I is 3, what do? We print out 3 stars. We print out a star and a star and a star. When I is 4, etc. So essentially what we are doing is we are printing the stars on different lines, which again, we talked about the idea that if you want to print out the same number of stars on the same line, you need to have a print. So let me just go ahead and do that. Let me just make this a print. So what I'm trying to say is what's happening here is when I is 1, we go from 1 to 1. And when I is 2, we go from 1 to 2. So we print out 2 lines of output. Here, that's why we print out 2 lines of output. Here, we print out 3 lines of output because I is 3. When I is 4, we go 1, 2, 3, 4. So we print out 4 stars of output. And eventually all these stars will line up and stack up on top of each other. So what we need to do is we need to actually print the stars on the same line like this. So we need to print out a star here. And then let me just go ahead and clear it. Let me clear this. So what we need to do is we need to actually print out the star. So when I is 2, we need to print out a star. And then while that same iteration is going, we print out the star again. Same thing for 3. We need to print it on the same line. And then same thing with 4. We need to print it on the same line. Same thing with 5. We need to print it on the same line. So essentially what's happening is while I am running it, I am going to be doing a print on the same line. Same line, I'm going to be doing a print. So let's just run this line of output, see what it does. And then I'll just clear the message and then run output. I'll clear everything and I'll run it. And now essentially what we are doing is we are printing all the stars on the same line. So that's the case where it's printing on the same row. So everything's being printed on the same row. Essentially what we need to do is when we print out a star and we finish this line, we need to go to a new line before starting fresh and printing the next few lines of output. So essentially when we go from I is 1 to I is 2, we need to separate the lines by a println. And in order to do that, we need to put our println in the correct position. It's not going to go here. It's not going to go after here, because if I did it after here, we can see what happens. I can go ahead. Oh, let me go ahead and fix my indentation. I don't know what happened here. Let me fix my indentation. If I did the println here, what's gonna happen is gonna print out star, star, star. It's going to do the first case where all the stars are the same line, and I basically have a print followed by a println. We talked about if you have a print followed by a println, you could have just did that in a println instead of doing a print and then a println. If you have like an empty println and then you have a print, you would just you combine it to a println. So that was just the very first problem that we did, which was the issue. And the idea is if I put it here, basically after this loop runs, this is where I need to basically have my println happen. That is because now if I run it, what's happening is we are going from I, so I starts from 1, and then the inner loop will run based on the outer loop. So meaning we go from j is 1 to whatever I is, and I in this case starts at 1. So let's go ahead and trace through this code right here. I think this is where I lose a lot of people. So far I think I might have lost some of you guys, and I am so sorry, and I'm going to attempt to try and fix that as best as I can. And I'm going to just say, I'm just going to just create a new text box here, add a new text box, and this is just going to be the code that I just wrote right here. So essentially what's happening, let's just go ahead and see what's happening. We have a variable I, and one thing I forgot to mention is whenever you have nested loops, I always like to draw a diagram of the different variables that I have. In this case, I have I and j. If I had I, j, k, I would write them out in a table. And it's always a good idea to write out a table because it will tell you what's happening at each iteration. And then what I do is the first iteration I have, and I'll just write like an output. So basically the first iteration we start I at 1. And now what do we do here? In this case, we start j at 1. Remember how the first example I talked about where it started at 1 and then we go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is the case where we go from 1. So j starts at 1. And then what do we do here? We do a print. We just print out a star. Now we go back to our update. Our update becomes 2. And now what do? We say for int j, now j is 2 because we updated the variable j to be 2. And we say 2 is less than or equal to I. And what is I in this case? I is currently right here. I is currently 1. Is 2 less than 1? No. So that means we break out of this loop. And what do we do now? Now what we do is we print out an empty line. That means before we run I is 2, we basically print out a blank line. I'll write right here, blank line. We print out a blank line. So that means our new output will appear on this line right here. So now what does I become? I now becomes 2. And then this becomes, I'll just say fails for I is 2. Sorry, for j is 2 in the first iteration. So now I becomes 2. Again, we talked about how we have to update. So now j becomes 1. We start j at 1 with I is 2 now. And now we go, is j less than or equal to 1? Or sorry, is j less than or equal to I? J is 1, I is 2. 1 is less than or equal to 2. So what do we do here? We just print out a star here. Just print out a star. And then we basically do an update now because that's how it works. It does initialization and the test. If a test passes, it goes on to the execute to the body, and then it does the update. So now I becomes 2. So now we check again. So j is 2. Now is j less than or equal to I? J is currently 2 and I is currently 2. Yes, j is currently less than or equal to I because they're both equal. So now what do? We just print out a star again. And then now we go to our update. We just print out a 3. That is a horrible star, guys. I apologize. Let me just fix it. Let me just go ahead and fix it right here. So now what do? We print out a star. And then Now we check, okay, j is now 3, so we say, is j less than or equal to I? So that means, is 3 less than or equal to 2? No, that's not true. So that condition fails. And now we basically, what do we do now? Before we move on to I equals 3, we print out a blank line. So we do a blank line right here, print out a blank line. And then we follow the same procedure. Now we know j is going to go from 1 to 2 to 3, and it's going to fail on 4. It's going to fail on 4. Again, I'm just doing it fast because hopefully you see the pattern by now. J is always going to go from 1 to I, and then it's going to fail on the one iteration after I. So in this case, if I was 2, it's going to fail on 3. If I is 3, it's going to fail on 4. And then we print out the number of stars based on the number of lines that we produced here. So we print out 1, 2, 3. We print out 3 stars. And same thing with 4. We'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it will fail on 5. So basically we'll go 1, 2, 3, it will fail, and then it will basically pass, it will fail on 5, and it will print out 4 stars. 1, 2, 3, it will print out 4 stars. So that's basically the idea of how this program works. Again, it's like a more complicated program. Hopefully, we're now starting to dive deep into the more advanced concepts that you will see later on. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that hopefully I introduced nested loops as basics and the best as I could. If you still have questions, which I hopefully you guys should have a lot of questions. If you do, feel free to ask or comment them out on the comment section. Thanks for watching this video. I hope to see you in another video, and peace. Take care.